We're just going to take a second, let everybody join us, because I can see there are people in the waiting room as it processes everybody getting in. All right. Okay. So a few more people coming in. This is good. Four more people. All right, we'll give it one more minute just to be safe, just in case there are any tech delays. Just check my email and see if anybody is struggling to get on. Nope, that's a good sign.
Jerry, I'm going to introduce you too. So you want to just kind of sit on this chair and then come over when
I'll get a stool out.
Okay.
All right, I think we are ready to go. Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Billy. I'm going to give a quick overview of Zoom, and then I'm going to pass it along to Jeannie. At the bottom of your screen, you're going to see the chat button. I'm going to pull that up, and I'm going to write hello in the chat right now. It's going to be really tempting to write a lot in the chat about our thoughts and ideas as they're coming up. We're going to ask that you just use the chat for questions. Either myself, Betsy, or Michelle will be monitoring the chat to make sure all the questions get answered in the order that they come in. There will be a Q&A at the end of pretty much every section with Jeannie. So just as questions come up, just type them in the chat. You don't have to type them specifically when we get to the Q&A. In fact, if you want it to be answered, it's better to type it in sooner. So, during the course of these next 3 days and over the course of the 9 days of the Institute, Jeannie's going to ask people if they would like to work with her. And out of fairness, the way that this is going to work will be with a raise hand function. So if you go under participants right now, you're going to see an option that says raise hand. If you click raise hand when Jeannie says, I'm looking for somebody with XYZ or who wants to work on XYZ, click that raise hand function. And we'll go generally in the order that the hands get raised. That's the fairest way that we can do that.
Close.
Also, right now, if you are seeing, if Zoom's images are set up in gallery view, that means you see a whole bunch of small boxes. You're going to want to set it up in speaker view so you can see who's talking. So up in the top right of your screen, you will see the button that says speaker view. Click on that. And that should just show you now my big face. And then as people are talking and presenting, it will automatically toggle back and forth between the presenters, and you don't have to try and figure out where to be looking on the small boxes. That's all I have to say about the tech. I'm going to pass it on to Jeannie.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're very, very happy to see you. It's a thrill and an honor to be here. We have over 200 people from all over the world joining us. And some of them are watching online, and some of them are watching after the fact due to time differences. All of us who are involved in this work are delighted to share what we know individually and collectively. First, I have to thank Baldwin Wallace University, the Conservatory, and specifically the Community Arts School. And the person who is the head of that is Adam Sheldon, and he is assisted by Meredith Kurtz. We are all very indebted to them for their enormously wonderful support, their hard work, their many hours, and their willingness to support this work going out into the world. And I want to thank Benjamin Zarnota, who you'll meet in a minute, because he was the person who introduced me to Baldwin Wallace. There's two senior faculty that I'd like to introduce first are Michelle Rosen from New York City and Betsy Fiedler from Massachusetts. You can read about all of our faculty on the biography page, which is in Google Classroom. Our other faculty members are Jeff Costello from Michigan, Leishan Moore from Washington State, Amanda Chmela from New York, Billy Gallner from Vancouver, Canada, Benjamin Zarnota from Ohio. And they are joined by Moran Cohen Talmor in Israel, and by breakout faculty Roseanne Fraley from Maryland, Aaron Putti from Ottawa, Canada, Jocelyn Medina from New York, Kate McGarry Gantz from North Carolina, Andrea Randall Lutis from Texas, and Craig Tompkins from Vancouver, Canada. Davin Youngs from Illinois, Theo Bleckman from New York, Karen Hall McNamara from New Mexico, Eden Castile from Rhode Island, and an unofficial faculty helper, right-hand, left-hand person here at home to me is my husband, Jerry Kaplan. And you may, over the course of the work, see him bringing me tea or helping me out in some way. He's my techie person, and he's almost a faculty member. He's like our mascot, I guess. Have a few short announcements. Our Monday schedule for level 1 has been changed a little bit because something came up very last minute that necessitated this change, and I apologize for any inconvenience this has caused you. If you have an issue with the schedule change, please let us know, and we will accommodate that as much as we can. The schedule is on the Google Classroom where you go to check it out, and you'll see the adjustments we've made. And we did change the break just a little bit, even though I said we wouldn't. We had no choice.
And Jeannie, we forgot to mention Trinice. She's one of our faculty too.
I'm so sorry. Dr. Trinice Robinson Martin, thank you, Betsy. I didn't do that intentionally. Who is from New Jersey. And did I forget anybody else? Just Trinice? Oh, I feel terrible about that. This is what happens when you do things at 4 o'clock in the morning. But I do want to say, and this is important, that Somatic Voicework stands very firmly with Black Lives Matter. And it is very important to us to reach out into the Black, Indigenous, people of color, all races, everywhere, all persuasions, without prejudice or in any way judging. We support all of those peoples in having their rights and all privileges. And we are doing outreach in the community. We haven't done much because we just started, but we are going to do more of that. And I would like to also recognize and honor the death of John Lewis, who was a very powerful member of Congress for many years, but started out as a civil rights worker alongside Dr. Martin Luther King. He passed away. And also this week, we lost Reverend C.T. Vivian, who was his colleague with Dr. King. And we honor the contribution that these men have made in their lives to all of us, Americans and all international people. And again, Trinice, I'm so sorry. That's what you get for doing it in the first thing in the morning. Okay. Because I teach from the written materials very loosely, I have given my faculty permission, so that would be Betsy, Michelle, and Billy, permission to do what Betsy just did, which is go, Jeannie, you forgot this. Jeannie, what? You know, you're over here. You got to be over there. And they will interrupt me to like steer the ship in the right direction. They're not being rude. They're not being disrespectful. They're actually being asked to do that. So when that happens, don't worry about it. Also, the course is structured for you to be able to ask questions. Now, I don't take thousands of questions, but things do come up as we're teaching. And that is the function of the chat room. So as Billy already said, please don't put in, yay, whoopee, or, oh, I never heard of that. We love those comments, but they can't go in the chat room because we're saving that just for questions. And the questions will be monitored and I will get them. Please do not think that you're losing class time because I'm answering questions. You're not. It was structured into the program in the first place. Please show up for all sessions. We take attendance normally, And of course, that would be a little difficult, but we are watching you, the big eyes. So if you are consistently 10 or 15 minutes late every time we start, we're going to notice that, and then we're not going to give you the certificate of attendance. Um, and we have a wide variety of people that are interested in and participating in this course. That's one of its strengths. So we have teachers who have backgrounds in classical literature, people working in music theater or jazz, pop, gospel, folk, rock, country, alternative styles. We have K through 12 music educators. We have people who work with children, teenagers, college students, graduate students, choral conducting, church musicians, and singer-songwriters. And we have people who have a strong background in education or pedagogy, and we have some people who do not have any background in that. So allow for this diversity when we do breakouts, because there may be people there who are very able and people who are very beginner. And please embrace the whole range of the tapestry of people who are working with voices all over the world. It's great. You will get a chance to get to know each other electronically more and more as we go on. And you do have some required videos, which we encourage you to watch. And also we have wonderful movement breaks for you. When we're live, we do the movement breaks as a deliberate thing that you must take part in before you start your break. So since we're all stuck in front of this machine, I encourage you to take advantage of some of the wonderful movement that was contributed by our Somatic Voicework teachers, many of whom have backgrounds in bodywork disciplines or dance and choreography. And so they've given us some really nice things to shake us loose and keep us from being cramped up at the end of the day. I always start these sessions the very first day of level 1 and the last day of level 3 with a acknowledgement and gratitude. I'm big on gratitude. I am so grateful for everything in my life. There's so much love in my life. And I really think that that matters. So I'm starting by saying that I'm grateful for all the people I just introduced, for all of you, and for everyone else that's in my life that supports me. I hope that this work will allow us all to expand our ability to be grateful, to give and to receive information, to disagree respectfully when that seems like it's necessary, and to contribute. My faculty has contributed enormously to the improvement of the delivery of this course. They have made suggestions which have been valuable to all of us and hopefully also will be to you. Now, I am going to take a look at our material. So you all have a course book which you were given online. And I will ask you on your own from time to time to go through a section in the break or in the evening, which is a read-only section. That is to say, I'm not going to teach every single aspect of the course, one segment at a time. Some I do, and some I just say, okay, you're going to just read this. If when you read it, you have questions, when you come back to class, you put your questions in the chat room. We will also have an opportunity for you to have a one-to-one or maybe small groups with faculty members who can help answer your questions or explain points. We have office hours with them, and we will also have Craig Tompkins will be working with people as they're going through the tests if they have issues. Normally we do that in the cafeteria. We tell you go have lunch together and talk about all this stuff. But since we can't do that, literally, we will try to make it work for you virtually. The first pages in section 1 talk about how somatic voice work works, what are in the levels, what you can expect to get. That's kind of takes the place of what will you get out of this course that you usually have in curriculum. And then it tells you a little bit about the history of the course and about my history, just so you know who I am and how this all came about. And so you will have a little bit more reason to trust what you are being given and to evaluate it in a way that would work for you. I do not say that this is the right way or the only way or the best way. It's just my way. And I hope that it serves your needs. And if that happens, then it can be your way too. And we welcome you into our Somatic Voicework community. It's a loving, kind, and generous community that is fun and serious. We are an elite, and I say that deliberately, elite methodology for vocal pedagogy for all styles of singing. I'm now on the section called the key ingredients of somatic voice work. So I am going to go over this section with you. The key ingredients of somatic voice work have everything to do with the primary drive in the physical body and in the brain, which is to inhale and exhale. You can live without food for weeks and water for days, but you can only live without air for minutes. And the body will do everything it can to keep you breathing because that is its primary directive. So any method of teaching singing that inhibits your ability to inhale and exhale freely is detrimental to you. Whatever we can do that allows the throat to be relaxed and comfortable and the larynx to sit in an easy position is conducive to easy inhalation and easy exhalation. And actually, that oxygenates the blood. It makes us more vital and alive. It makes us more human beings. So breathing is really a very important aspect of being alive. And vigorous singing is an aerobic activity. When we are doing any kind of exaggerated singing, you can get into a position where the sound is tight, and that actually inhibits your ability to breathe in and out. One of the things that causes that to happen is fear, and nervousness is a form of fear. Also, anxiety is a form of fear. So in that modality, the fight-flight mechanism kicks in, and that is something you cannot control with your conscious mind. You can't decide that you're not going to go into shock. If you're in an accident, you can go into shock. And it might be inconvenient for you not to choke on something, but you can't stop yourself from trying to cough it out either. So when you interface with the musculature and the nervous system that controls those responses, you are interfacing with literally life and death responses in the body. And so, of course, at this time, specifically this time, we have so much anxiety and so much agitation. And it's so difficult to counterbalance those things that it's not unusual for us to start to sing and have some tension in the singing. So somatic voice work rests on the idea that we want the whole body, the whole person, the entire human being to function in a comfortable, efficient, and working manner, which allows you to be yourself, express your voice as you want in the sound that's natural and comfortable to you. And if you're patient and you are willing to put in the time and wait, you can sing any kind of music that way. And if you don't want to take my word for that, I have people on my faculty or people who have worked with me for a long time who are not necessarily here now, who sing in rock, in jazz, in gospel, in pop, on Broadway, classical people. And you can ask them, how do they do that? And they're not manipulating any structures in their throat on purpose. They're not squeezing, pulling, lifting, or doing anything with the vocal folds or the larynx on purpose. And all of the work that we do is in keeping with those principles. I guess you could say we learn kind of biofeedback as a mode. We biofeedback ourselves into all these sounds. The purpose of training is to develop the ability to easily and deeply breathe, to manage the breath and the sound at the same time, and to make the sounds that are not only appropriate to the pitch and the volume and the vowel sound, but to you, that they fit. I don't want you to sound like somebody else. There are people who, when they open their mouths, you can say, oh, that one I know, that one studies with so-and-so. No, can't do that with my students. The next part is context. Everything depends upon the context, which is the intention of the teacher and the student to agree upon a certain goal before you start an exercise. If you don't know what you want, how are you going to get something? So the teacher has to learn how to think diagnostically, technically, functionally, so that when they give an exercise, they have an expectation. This exercise is probably going to elicit this response. And that is what we have. We have a stimulus, that's the exercise, and you have a response, that's the sound that the student makes. Stimulus, response, corrected stimulus, new response. Repetition, we call that waiting for the bus, when we repeat things over because they're working well. And then a new stimulus and whatever the new result is. That's the dynamic. That's the context. And so teachers have to understand that there's no magic syllables, you know. First you sing la, la, la on an octave arpeggio. And then you sing do, day on a triad. And then you sing a descending pattern of E and U. And this, you know. So you get a sheet of pitches and syllables. And that's Madame Grabotska's exercises. So if you're sitting home, and when I start to work with people, or when anybody's working with people, you start to write down the note patterns with the syllables. Useless. You're going to learn to think functionally, and you are going to make up the function of the exercise based on what it is you see and hear. At a level 1, you're going to do the basic information first, because if you don't get the register work, which is coming next, nothing else works. You have to be able to do that. Now, the rest of this you can read. This is the working principles and assumptions. Just read that when you have a moment so you know what they are. And then we're going to go on. So singing is more than just making sound. A lot of classical singing is about make the sound, make the sound, make the sound, make the sound, make the sound. Enough already. And, you know, in all of the different styles, there are different criteria. In music theater, it's, you know, acting. Give me, be the part. In jazz, it's, you know, improvise, you know, be free, do that. Everybody's got their criteria, which is fine, but not when that's that's the pathway, but not the destination. The destination is to be expressive and communicate something. That's what music is about. We also try to give everybody, bring everybody into this perfect place where everything functions freely and everything is balanced and happy. And don't be surprised if it doesn't stay that way, even if you do touch on it, because we're people, not machines. So there's a lot of messiness in somatic voice work, but it's calculated. That's like, we know, even when it's really good, it's still going to be a little messy because human beings are messy. And life is messy. So that's the context. Now, if you go to the next page, we have functional mechanics and listening. So this course is a very auditory course. You really do have to listen a certain way. You have to listen for what is in the sound. First thing we're talking about is something called vocal registers. A register is a quality of pitches where all the pitches have the same texture and are identifiable as a group. We have 4 qualities that we talk about. Head, which is usually in the high range. Head mix, which is middle to high. Chest mix, which is middle to low. And chest, which is low. And as you get more skilled, all of those can move around. So you can bring head way down low. You can bring chest pretty high. That's a skill set that you have to learn. Then we have traditional pitch parameters, which at some point you must memorize. This comes from classical vocal training. And you really need to know what those pitch parameters are, because if you have a low-voiced person and you happen to be a high voice person like me, and you start teaching that person in the pitch range that's comfortable for you, they're going to be having a very hard time. And then you think, oh, this person is a terrible singer. It's you. You're the culprit. So you really have to know what those pitch parameters are, and that will help you notice if the music is well written or not. And then the next page is the pitch parameters. So in classical singing, a soprano can run from like G below middle C to high C. That's up 2 octaves above middle C.
Excuse me, Jeannie. 5 minutes
Thank you.
for this segment.
The mezzo is lower, the contralto is lower. In traditional old music theater, the belters went to about C above middle C. But these days they go wherever they can get to, any note they can get out. Falsetto is a term we usually use in regard to men. It means a little false. And there's nothing false in terms of how it comes out. It's a normal sound. But it sounds false because in an adult male, they generally don't speak like that. And the pitch range is from G below middle C to F or G, but a male soprano can go higher than that. Then we have the tenors. In a classical sound, it goes up to the C above middle C. In a choral sound, just a little lower. And the character categorizing baritone is between a baritone and a tenor. So it's either a high tenor with a lot of heft. High baritone that voice is light, or a tenor with a lot of weight. And their pitch range is up to A or B in the octave above middle C. Then you have a true baritone, which runs from G to G, bass baritone from F to F, and a true bass from E to E, and then a low bass, like a Russian bass, down all the way to low C. In all of the range, there are little adjustments every fourth or fifth, and I've given you those. But the big break, the one where we yodel, the one where there's an abrupt change between the speaking voice and the high voice, or between chest and head, is around E or F above middle C. And it's at least a fifth of a span there where things change. And part of working technically is to smooth out those transitions so you don't get a crack where you don't want one. And in some styles of music, you do want one, because if you're yodeling, if you're singing music that has that as an ingredient, then you might want to be able to yodel. And Theo Blackman, one of our faculty members, who's a good friend, once tried to teach me to yodel, which was hilarious. And he's a master at it. But I really didn't do too well. It's better, right, Theo? Now, in classical training, we talk about resonance, and I don't refer to that very much because this commercial music, contemporary commercial music, or CCM, is always amplified. So you don't really need to generate the kind of resonance a classical singer has to have to fill a house on their lungs only. Another way to look at that, which is a present moment idea, is the relationship between formants and harmonics, which we will explain if you don't know that. I call it vowel sound shaping, sometimes acoustic efficiency, and you can relate it to the woofer tweeter of the old-fashioned speakers, the big speakers, where the woofer was the large one and the tweeter the small one, also related to bass and treble. That's always a part of what we're doing. Then in the vowels, we start out with just these three. Bright, which is toward a smile. That shortens the vocal tract and picks up the high frequencies. Dark, which is a little bit more oval, where your mouth is a little longer, or a combination of the two. Your throat and your mouth together is called the vocal tract, and that's referred to as a filter. And that includes your lips, jaw, your mouth, your head position, and they are the amplifiers or changers, and they are called also part of the vocal tract. The larynx, which is where the vocal folds are, is in the middle of your throat in your Adam's apple voice box, and that is always the source. So this model is called source filter. And then there are other tone qualities components. We have breathy sound. Hi, this is a breathy sound. oh, I really like you. And clear, which my voice is not at the moment. Guess it's not warmed up enough. And nasal, we all know people who have nasal voices, especially here in New York. And that's usually a kind of tension inside. And then noisy. Right now, my own voice is noisy. And that's because I have a small spot on my left vocal fold that is not working normally. That's been true for the past 7 years. Ugh. And so sometimes I get vocal fry and all kinds of weird noises, and sometimes it goes off pitch. That thing, I hate that, but that's part of the problem I have, and that is a noise. The dynamics are that we talk about are, of course, intensity. They have to do with amplitude, and another way to measure that would be decibels. And in research, they talk about sound pressure level, or subglottic pressure, which we will explain to you. But basically, those are all measurements of how loud something seems. And there's two measurements. One is objective, which is a decibel scale done by a machinery. And then there's perceptual, which is subjective and up to us. Because we're on Zoom, we're going to ask you often, how loud is that to you? Because sometimes we can't tell. You're not in the room with us. A good singer should have about an octave to an octave and a half minimum. 2 octaves is better. Smoothly connected with even vowels and dynamics under your control for 7/8 of that. And then when we apply all this, we want musical skill and vocal virtuosity, honest communication in the text and music. We want to be able to stand up in front of an audience and be comfortable. And I expect everyone who's teaching singing to be able to sing well. If you can't, there has to be a medical reason why that's not so. Otherwise, you just haven't learned what you need to know. All of this works with vocal health and helping people like their sound, like what they do, like how they sound, like how they feel, which doesn't happen all the time, and it certainly doesn't happen right at the beginning. And so you can go ahead and read all that, and you have to take a good moment to read about blaming the student. Very often in the process, when we run out of options and we can't think of anything, then we blame the student. Oh, that student is so resistant. Oh, they're always holding on to their tongue. Don't do that. Don't do that. Go back and find out what you don't know and what you're not expressing. If the student is paying you money, then probably they're not going to resist too much. Okay, and then you must learn to listen. You must learn what has to come first and what you have to look at. And I think that's pretty much the end of this section. So you're going to go back and look at that, look at the details of that, and make sure that you take a look at the things that I went over very quickly. Now, we have Billy Gallner now is going to take over, and he is going to take you through the next section, which is section 2. So Billy, if you're ready, you can go ahead.
All right, here we go. So I'm going to be giving an overview of CCM styles. Let me just pull up my PowerPoint. So we're going to start by comparing opera and contemporary music theater essentials. So this is comparing and contrasting the two, and we're currently on page 14 of the course book. So in opera, there are generally no extra vocal requirements, meaning you're not required to be an excellent actor or dancer. It's great if that's available, but it's not a requirement for the job. However, in music theater, you are required at very least to act and dance. It's also not uncommon to then have your special skills come into play. For example, in the latest SpongeBob musical, they were looking for a high rock tenor who was also a great dancer and a professional skateboarder. So these requirements can literally range the whole gamut. In opera, you learn roles, so you would prepare the role of Tosca, and then you would go from opera company to opera company, traveling around showcasing this role. However, in music theater, you learn specific songs for specific auditions, and generally you will only learn songs from a show once you're cast in that show as that role. In opera, there's generally no typing. And I say generally because we're not going to pretend that the casting of operas is always fair or inclusive, but there's generally no typing. Whereas in music theater, unfortunately, casting directors look at you, they go, could this person look the part? And then you might not even get to sing at your audition based on whether or not they have typed you out in that first sort of round of casting, which is not right, but is the reality of the industry. In opera, keys can't really be changed unless you're Pavarotti at the end of your career. It's generally you gotta sing in the key that it was written in. However, in contemporary music theater, keys are flexible. This is even at like the top of the top. So Gavin Creel, when he did Book of Mormon in the West End, they lowered, I believe, down a semitone. For a lot of the revivals, they'll lower the keys by a third or a fourth because they're wanting it to go from a legit soprano sound into a more contemporary belty sound. In opera, the music's generally performed as written, so it would be very stylistically inappropriate to add in a run and then end on a high note because you felt like it. People would be pretty shocked in the audience. However, in contemporary music theater, there is an expectation that artists are making choices. It would be stylistically inappropriate not to add in the riff or not to add in the high note. But then sometimes it would be stylistically inappropriate to add it. So you just have to be really familiar with the stylistic choices. Moving on from that, in opera, there is cadenza. So there are parts where it sounds like improvisation. However, the difference is that the cadenzas are learned in advance, whereas in contemporary music theater, the riffs and improvisation are sometimes done in the moment. In opera, there's a voice type and a fach. So once you are told that you are a soprano or a mezzo or a contralto or a countertenor, tenor, baritone, bass, you generally sing within that. And then from there, once you're told that your fach is that you are a lyric tenor or you are a dramatic soprano, you're generally going to sing the repertoire that falls within that category. However, in contemporary music theater, singers don't have that luxury. If you're cast in a show, you may be asked to sing a soprano high C, and then turn around and sing a low G, and then belt a high F. For example, take a look at any of the casting notices, even just for cruise lines, and they're asking all of the female singers, regardless of voice type, to sing a high C in a legit quality and belt to F5, and that's just a minimum requirement. I'm now going to give a brief overview of contemporary commercial music in one slide, if that is possible. So briefly discussing the origins, these are largely rooted in various American musical traditions. All styles of CCM music have their roots in Black musical traditions, even country music. There's a really fantastic discussion about this by Ken Burns, who is a music historian and documentary filmmaker, and I will post this in the chat. In the 1700s through the 1800s, you have a large movement of enslaved African people into North America. With this movement of people came the musical traditions that led to the blues, which led to jazz, which led to rock, and every other style of CCM music that exists today. It's very important that we acknowledge those traditions and that we give credit where it is due. With that, there's a long history of classism and racism towards CCM styles. There isn't a long history of academia associated with CCM styles. You can't get a master's degree in folk music or a doctorate in gospel. Generally, while that is changing, it's not the norm yet. Right? Keyword yet, hopefully. And so there is a tendency for people to look down on CCM styles. With that, because these are rooted in Black musical traditions, there are often sort of racist attitudes that permeate towards CCM styles, and we want to be really conscious of that. For example, when discussing riffing, I've heard people say, oh, it's just all over the place and it's too much and I don't get it. And really what we could do is we could say, oh, there's a lot of musical virtuosity in that. That takes a lot of technical proficiency. Vocally, that's really demanding. And so we want to make sure that as teachers, we have power to be kind and to make sure that as generations move forward that we're being more inclusive and really checking our language and personal biases before we say anything about a style that's different from our own. Moving on, in the 1930s and 40s, there are some big changes that influenced how sound was made. So the changes in technology influenced vocal production and styles. In the 1930s and 40s, radio was introduced. Early recording technologies really did not work well with the big belty sounds that were required in a room because you needed to be able to fill a room in the 30s and 40s. But the early microphones weren't really great at picking up these huge voices. So early recording technology allowed for these more croony and jazzy styles to take off because the sounds could be recorded really well and then projected through radio. Changes in amplification technology through the 1950s really improved the quality as well, which allowed rock to flourish. We're now going to briefly discuss music theater's complicated origins. So one of the earliest influences comes from 1800s English music hall and vaudeville. So this image that you can see here, this is West End's Music Hall in the United Kingdom. So there are singers on the stage, there are people sitting in the audience, but then you'll see up in the rafters, off to the sides, you can see that that's where the rich people would sit. That was called the balcony. And they wanted to be seen, which is why they were up on the sides and not even facing the stage. Sometimes this was more about being seen and showing that you were rich rather than attending the performance. Traditionally, people would talk during these performances and eat and drink beer. So it was as a performer, I couldn't imagine that being such a graceful experience. But that was stylistically what was happening at the time and influenced what Broadway is now. There was also an influence from vaudeville and minstrel shows, jazz, and very importantly, there was a very large movement of people of Jewish people coming from Eastern Europe, and with them came their musical traditions. These come from a cantorial background, or the traditions come from the Middle East, and these composers really incorporated that into their sound, and this is now what we would call like the typical Broadway sound, where a lot of the harmonic and melodic ideas come from those musical traditions as well. We're now going to give a brief overview of music theater. So before 1927, these were mostly revue shows. So the shows didn't necessarily have a storyline. It was a collection of songs and dance numbers. It would star vaudeville legends and lots of showgirls in elaborate costumes. However, in 1927, there was the Showboat Revolution. Showboat was revolutionary because it was the first book musical, which means that the story had a beginning, middle, and end, and the songs were an integrated part of the story. So it wasn't just story is happening, stop, and a musical number for entertainment. The songs now keep the story flowing. It was also revolutionary because it dealt with political issues and racial issues of the time. It was the first show to do that because it was potentially going to alienate audiences. However, that has become an interwoven part of musical theater ever since. Now we're going to talk about classic Broadway shows. So this is generally from the late 1920s through the 1960s. That's the eras that we would call classic Broadway shows. In the 1930s, we see the rise of great stars like Cole Porter and Ethel Merman. Through the 1940s, this is where you start having more sweeping shows like Oklahoma that has a ballet suite. Composers like Frank Lesser, Lerner and Loewe, and Leonard Bernstein really hit their stride. And big stars like Gene Kelly and Mary Martin started hitting the scene. In the 1950s, this is a huge decade for music theater. This is often referred to as the golden era of music theater, and some of the most impressive and popular shows come from this era. These include Guys and Dolls, The King and I, My Fair Lady, West Side Story, and many more. It's also, the golden era thing can be a little bit confusing because sometimes it's referred to as the 50s, but it's just generally agreed 1940s to 1960s is generally the golden era of music theater. From there, in 1968, it all changed with Hair, which was the first rock musical. It featured all rock music, no stars, infamous nudity, and rock and Broadway have never been the same since. In the 1970s, there was a continuation with rock musicals with shows like Jesus Christ Superstar, Grease, The Wiz, and many others. But in 1975, things changed again. A chorus line debuted, and it was unique in the fact that there was no separation between the singers' ensemble and the dancers' ensemble. Traditionally, you would have a collection of singers who would be the singers' ensemble, you would have a collection of dancers who were the dancer ensemble, and then you would have the stars. Whereas a chorus line, there was no distinction between any of that. Everyone was expected to sing, dance, and act at the same level. The idea of a triple threat had been around before that, but in 1975 with the chorus line, this revolutionized Broadway because now everyone was expected to be a singer, a dancer, and an actor. Economically, this impacted Broadway because it's a lot cheaper to just have one set of performers rather than three. Through the 1980s, you see a large amount of revival shows, rock shows, and a lot of London imports from the West End. Big composers of this era include Andrew Lloyd Webber, Stephen Sondheim, and Claude-Michel Schoenberg, who is the composer of Les Miserables. These sung-through shows are often operatic in nature and are often referred to as mega musicals. These include Les Mis, Miss Saigon, Phantom of the Opera, and other musicals of the like. Oh, sorry everybody, there's just something funny just happened. Let me just press that button again. All right. In the 1990s, there was a large amount of economic uncertainty in the late 1980s, which led to less risk-taking on Broadway in general, and that has continued to this day. In 1994, we have the introduction of Disney to Broadway, and the scene has never been the same since, with Beauty and the Beast. Beauty and the Beast was hit by critics with very mixed reception. Some people thought it was wonderful that Disney was coming on because they create these fantastic movie musicals in the animated world, and some people really lamented it as the mass commercialization of Broadway. And since Lion King has gone on to be one of the best-selling musicals of all time. In 1996, Rent reinvigorated everybody's love for rock musicals, but those who had seen Hair in 1968 were like, this isn't the first time we've seen a rock musical. But it definitely made everybody love rock musicals again. Into the early 2000s, we see a handful of new trends. There's a good mix of revivals and new works on Broadway. However, there's a new category of musical that's starting to hit the scene, and this is musicals based on hit movies. You see shows like Saturday Night Fever, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, and Hairspray hitting Broadway. And this continues up to this day, where King Kong was recently a Broadway musical. You also see the introduction of jukebox musicals, with shows like Mamma Mia, Moving Up, Jersey Boys, and Beautiful, the Carole King musical. Those trends both continue to this day. So now we're going to discuss the 2010s to present. You have a lot of celebrity writers for major shows. For example, Kinky Boots, you have Cyndi Lauper or Waitress. They're bringing in Sarah Bareilles. The reason why is only a quarter of Broadway shows recoup their initial investment, which means they require a lot of star casting to sell tickets, superstar songwriting teams, shows based on hit movies or jukebox musicals. They're trying to make sure they have a built-in audience so that when they open the show, people will be interested in attending it. For example, Kinky Boots is based off of a hit movie. The songwriter is Cyndi Lauper, who I think we all know is a huge superstar. They cast Billy Porter, who is a Broadway legend, to come in and play the iconic role of Lola. And it's just a way to guarantee that a show is going to be a hit. Now we're going to give a brief overview of music theater pitch ranges. So for men, it's generally one category. It's called a barytenor. You're expected to sing low G to A above middle C, sometimes going all the way up to B flat or B4. If you're playing the role of Evan in Dear Evan Hansen, you're going to have to sing that low G in the song For Forever, and you're going to have to top out at a B4 in that exact same song. So within 3 minutes, you're singing in a ton of range. The casting directors don't care if you're actually a tenor or you're actually a baritone or you're actually a bass. They just care, can you sing what's on the page? A traditional belter, in older shows, this would be a character actress, and she rarely would go above C5. And then a high belter, in current music, there's no upper limit. It's as high as you can go, taking chest mix above that E, F, G5 break. This is not just limited to female singers. Lots of male singers are singing up there and are expected to. If you're playing the role of Jesus or Judas in Jesus Christ Superstar, you're going to be going up there. Michael Kilgore is a really great example of this. Titus Burgess, Alex Newell, Billy Porter. It's anybody taking chest mix above that E, F, G5 break. Then you have the ingenue or juvenile. This is a middle voice, not too high, not too low. I call this sometimes Disney princess singing, but that's not an official term, that's just mine. And then you have a comedic or character actor. This is middle pitch ranges. It's generally speech-like, a little bit belty. It's not super, super high or super, super low. Often requires the use of a character voice. And you have to have excellent comedic chops, as the title would suggest. Now we're going to give a brief overview of CCM styles. And this is as they show up in their styles themselves and how they show up in music theater. So pop, great singers that you want to know. Now, just so everybody knows, because I know the comments are going to go, you left out this person. I know. It was very, very, very hard to just fit a handful of names on the slides. And so just know that I'm sorry for leaving out your favorites, but it was very painful for me too. So influential singers that you want to know are Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, Michael Jackson, and Prince. Contemporary singers who you're going to be familiar with are Adam Lambert, Beyonce, Bruno Mars, Adele, Lady Gaga, Rihanna. It's also really important to know with CCM styles that there's a lot of cross-referencing within the styles. So an artist like Beyonce could be categorized as pop rock, she could be categorized as R&B, but she also had a country song on her last album. So there's a ton of cross-referencing, and people don't necessarily stick themselves within a box. And so for the sake of pedagogy and learning, we are sticking these people into boxes. But this is just know that there's a lot of cross-referencing, and nobody's often clearly in one camp or another. Musicals that will use this pop rock sound would include Heathers, Wicked, Kinky Boots, and SpongeBob. SpongeBob is unique that every song in the musical was written by a different celebrity songwriter. Folk rock. Folk rock really hit its stride in the 1960s, and it's generally typified by artists like Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan, Leonard Cohen, and Tracy Chapman. Today, folk rock is about that sort of more laid-back vocal style, sometimes referred to as hip singing, so when people sing like this. But it also brings in the ideas from the 1960s where it was really important that the story of the song and the message of the song was the primary part. Artists include Lana Del Rey, Ruth B., Passenger, Sarah McLachlan, City and Colour, and James Bay. And this style is showing up in music theater with shows like The Great Comet of 1812, Spring Awakening, and Once. Now discussing country and bluegrass. You have the traditional country singers like Garth Brooks, Reba McEntire, Faith Hill, Keith Urban, and Brad Paisley. The more contemporary country singers, as I was talking about that cross-referencing, there's a little bit more of a pop influence in their sound. And this includes Carrie Underwood, Miranda Lambert, Casey Musgraves, and Josh Turner. If you are working with students and you are working with basses and you're looking for repertoire, check out this gentleman, Josh Turner. He has a low bass voice and it's very remarkable. I strongly recommend it. Musicals that use this show, you might be thinking, oh, well, I don't teach country singers. There's generally in every musical that happens now, there's like the arbitrary like country number that comes out of nowhere. In Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, there's just the song Oklahoma. It's the only country number in the whole show, but it's very, very full-fledged country. Then you have full-on country musicals like Shenandoah, 9 to 5, Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, and Cowgirls. R&B and soul is probably the most prolific and important genre in CCM because it influences all of the other genres. Influential singers, and this is probably where I had the hardest time narrowing down because there's just so many amazing people, would include Stevie Wonder, Sam Cooke, Luther Vandross, Patti LaBelle, Gladys Knight, Aretha Franklin, and Toni Braxton. This more contemporary singers, sometimes the earlier R&B sound was a little bit more melismatic, and vocally you would have a larger dynamic range, whereas now there's a little bit more of an influence from folk rock and more soul tradition, so sometimes the vocals can be a little bit more laid back. Artists include SZA, Summer Walker, Erykah Badu, India Arie, Her, Frank Ocean, Khaled, Trey Songz, and John Legend. Musicals include Dreamgirls, Memphis, The Wiz, Brooklyn, and In the Heights. I'm now going to talk about two specific types of R&B soul, and they're more era specific, but if your students are going to be working in any cruise ships, theme parks, any review shows, or even in a cover band, they're going to need to be very specific with these two genres of R&B and soul. The first one is Motown. This is specifically a 1960s R&B sound. It's affiliated with Motown Records. Artists include Diana Ross and the Supremes, the Ronettes, the Temptations, the Four Tops, the Jackson 5, Smokey Robinson, Gladys Knight. This sound is used all of the time. Shows include Little Shop of Horrors, Dreamgirls, Motown the Musical, Ain't Too Proud, and The Wiz. And one of the other more influential styles is disco. Disco is generally referred to as dance music from the 1970s through the 1980s. Disco is known for its driving beats and elaborate arrangements. Producers like Giorgio Moroder and Phil Spector really typify the disco sound. It's this orchestral wall of sound that is referred to. Artists include Donna Summer, Nile Rodgers, who's the leader of the band Chic, Rick James, the Bee Gees, Sister Sledge, and Boney M. This shows up in music theater all the time because disco feels great and it is a lot of fun to listen to. So Disaster the Musical was an entire disco musical about like a sinking cruise ship, which is like, who knew? Seth Rudetsky with his crazy, exciting ideas. Saturday Night Fever, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, Xanadu, and Mamma Mia are other shows. And then you have the jukebox musicals like The Cher Show and Summer, the Donna Summer musical, which are just, they're a jukebox musical and they're all about disco. Hip hop. This is another important category, specifically as we saw in 2015 when Hamilton came on the scene. It completely changed the face of music theater because it was the first mainstream successful hip hop musical. There were other hip hop musicals before, like Bring On to Noise, Bring On to Funk, but it didn't have as much mainstream success as Hamilton has had today. Influential singers include Lauryn Hill, Lil' Kim, Queen Latifah, Jay-Z, the Notorious B.I.G., and Tupac Shakur. Influential artists of contemporaries include Nicki Minaj, Cardi B, Lizzo, Remy Ma, Drake, A$AP Rocky, Kanye West, and Travis Scott. And shows again include In the Heights, Hamilton, Holler If You Hear Me, Bring Into Noise, Bring Into Funk. It's really important when you're assigning repertoire for your students that you really consider the distinction between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. You want to make sure that your students are singing from their lived experience, so make sure that you're finding repertoire that's appropriate. That's very, very, very important. Rock. So rock is very prolific on Broadway, and it is very prolific with your CCM students. Influential singers include Freddie Mercury of Queen, Ann Wilson of the band Heart, Tina Turner, Steven Tyler of Aerosmith, Steve Perry of Journey, Stevie Nicks, and so on. Influential singers of the contemporary include Pink, Imagine Dragons, Brendan Urie of Panic at the Disco, Mumford & Sons, and Hozier. Musicals include We Will Rock You, Hair, Jesus Christ Superstar, and Rock of Ages. And now we're going to go into a few different styles of rock. So that's like what we call like rock. Then there's punk and emo. Punk and emo is a slightly less polished version of rock. It's generally more guttural and very chest-dominant sound. It is intentionally not polished. Artists include Patti Smith, Kurt Cobain of Nirvana, Courtney Love, Billie Joe Armstrong, and Bikini Kill. The contemporary pop and punk and emo sound has more of a pop influence. That's because it helps to sell records. But the early punk and emo that was coming around in the 1990s, often sometimes referred to as grunge, that's a much grittier sound. The sound now is a little bit more pop influenced, and artists include Fall Out Boy, Good Charlotte, Hayley Williams of the band Paramore, Rancid, Sum 41, and My Chemical Romance. And again, you might be thinking, oh, I don't need to worry about punk because I'm only dealing with music theater singers, or I'm only dealing with this. It's showing up in music theater. There was American Idiot, which was a show that was entirely based in punk music, and Bat Out of Hell uses a lot of these punk rock sounds. And then we've got metal and hard rock. So influential singers include Disturbed, Slayer, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Pantera, Led Zeppelin, AC/DC, and Metallica. This is a very male-dominated genre, but you are starting to see artists like Ginger, who is a contemporary metal artist who is holding her own in this very, very male-dominated industry. And then you've got Dream Theater, Avenged Sevenfold, Opeth, Korn, and Slipknot. And again, you might be thinking, oh, I don't need to deal with that metal thing. You don't necessarily have to teach metal vocals if you don't feel comfortable, but you need to know that it is starting to show up in music theater. In the musical Beetlejuice, the character of Beetlejuice sings with this death metal gritty vocal production through the entire show. Bat Out of Hell, there's a lot of that same vocal distortion. In Book of Mormon, the song Man Up, there's a lot of that gritty sound. So how are you going to help a student get there? And in The Great Comet of 1812, same thing. A lot of the characters are singing with that really, really gritty distortion. It's also important to note that not all metal and hard rock use the same vocal production styles. Not all metal is using that really like what we would associate with a death metal or the grittier vocal production. Sometimes there's what we will call clean vocals, which is actually more of a rock singing style, which is how Adam Lambert sings or how Freddie Mercury sings. It's that bright chest mix up high. What makes it metal is more the orchestrations and how the band is playing. And then jazz. This brings us to our final slide. Again, this was very hard to narrow down, so please be kind in the comments. But influential singers include Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, Sarah Vaughan, Louis Armstrong, Frank Sinatra, Chet Baker, Carmen McRae, Anita O'Day, and Nat King Cole. Influential singers of the contemporary include Cecile McLaurin-Salvant, which is the young lady in this photo here, Kate McGarry, who is on faculty, hi Kate, Gregory Porter, Theo Bleckman, who's also on faculty, hi Theo, Kurt Elling, Esperanza Spalding, Bilal, who is an amazing jazz artist who I encourage you to check out. He's a combination of jazz and hip hop, and Michael Bublé. And shows include Chicago, City of Angels, After Midnight, and Ain't Misbehaving. So that is my presentation on an overview of CCM styles. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'm going to pass it back to Jeannie.
Thank you, Billy. I have to say, when I heard Billy do this, especially with the more recent stuff, I learned a lot. So this is what happens when you pass the baton to the younger generation. You get taught. It's really cool. I love it. So now we're going to go on into the text again, and we're going to go, please, read all of, Billy just gave you a thumbnail sketch of this very dense section here. So please do read what's there. What we have now that we did not have when I started this course, when I wrote this course in 2002, is we have YouTube and we have other resources on the internet. And so, of course, now you can avail yourself of all of those things. And I encourage you to look around. So now we're going to go to page 23, which is the terminology page. Now, I want to do two things before I forget. We use a numbering system here, and I know there's more than one, but we use the numbering system that says that middle C is C4, and this C above it is C5, and the C above that is C6. So if that's true, then this C below middle C is C3, and that one down the bottom is C2. And so the numbers change on A, where the scale runs to, where the letters repeat. And so when you're talking about C5, we're always talking about this C. It's a little bit of a shorthand instead of saying C above middle C every time. There are other numbering systems, but that's the one that we use. Now, in teaching singing, terminology has always been a problem. And that is because the profession itself is unlicensed, uncertified, and it is whatever it is. There is no such thing as classical singing training as a thing. It is however people configure it, however a school configures it, however an artist configures it. And we know some very general things about it in terms of voice research. But as I mentioned later, that if you get 10 singing teachers in a room and ask them what is classical singing, you get 10 really diverse answers. So that also is part of the problem with vocabulary. But I want you to use vocabulary as specifically and clearly as possible, and to stay away from what I call voice teacher jargon, or words made up by singing teachers that mean something only to the person who made up the term. I don't have any of those words. I also want, generally speaking, you want to know when you're looking at a person's function, what have you got? Who is this person? What's wrong, or what's needed that's missing? How can I fix it? What should I approach first? And you want to ask for a positive alternative rather than stopping any unwanted vocal behavior. So rather than say, don't do, think in your mind, what's the opposite of that? Do this. Because sometimes as you build in a positive new program, the negative old program just melts away. Not always, but that can work. as you learn to listen and you learn to analyze, then you'll get better at that. The the terminology is heavy in the direction of registers. So scroll down a little bit and you'll see registers again, and you'll see that a lot. So register is a group of sounds or tones or pitches with a unified quality or texture. Register is a group of sounds with a unified tonal quality or texture. That's a definition that's accepted by many people in the industry, and you should just memorize that. Okay? It does not talk about pitches. So even though I said head register generally is on the high side and chest is on the low side, as you become more proficient, that's less true. You can take head lower and you can take chest higher, and those are qualities that we take in music. And you do have to know how they sound, right? So you want to think of a register in a primary sort of way. Chest register we associate with a lower, louder, heavier or deeper or more substantial kind of sound. It is generally where the average man speaks, and most women who have lower voices speak. I'm kind of on the edge of that right now. So the example for that would be ah, that's my chest register. Okay? Now I had to learn how to do that. That was an absolutely not natural behavior to my throat, but I learned. It has very useful function in sound, and it allows us to engage the mechanism to really be on the voice, all those voice teacher phrases. It's also part of being able to do a very good belt sound that's not going to kill you. Head register is the opposite. So head register would be so that's the, for my voice, that's an easy sound. Part of what makes a light voice or a lyric voice, that sound is easy in us usually. And that would include tenors who have a lyric voice and who can sing lightly and be comfortable. We use the word light in most cases to mean head register. I find that that word is confusing because light can also mean softer. So when you say lighten up, do you want the person to sing headier or softer? Because they're not always the same. So that's another terminology problem. And also, when we talk about head register, a lot of us were taught to say head voice or head tone or head resonance, and then that's also confusing. So we try to stick to head register just because the register quality comes out of the vocal fold behavior. And so I talked about that. Definitely register. Oh, resonance. So I sort of a little bit talked about that. There's not a heavy emphasis on resonance unless you're going to do classical music, and then you do have to pay attention to it. But since a lot of the stuff we're talking about is CCM, we're trying to get to a place where the sounds are functioning in a healthy way, and we're not saying resonance is bad or that we don't want it, but that it's not a goal and it's not a primary teaching tool. Remember that, you know, you can sing really well without knowing anything about anything. You can just be a good singer. So when we talk about codifying and exchanging information in the analytical Western model, you know, knowing that doesn't necessarily help you sing. Not knowing that can also be a problem because you can sing badly and not realize it. So we're making that they're partners, they're not the same. We need to know the difference. I told you what the vocal tract was, you know what a pitch is. Be aware that a specific frequency is a note, and then sometimes when we use the word tone, we also talk about the general quality of the sound. The tone was clear or the tone was breathy. So that's another word that can be confusing. If you're talking about this tone, you're actually talking about that note, which is a frequency that we can measure. And then volume, I talked about that. You can read the details about that. And contemporary commercial music is everything we used to call non-classical, but we don't call it that anymore. And then Billy talked about the definitions. And so now we're going to go to functional principles. Is that right? Am I in the right place? No, 20. Only as far as 26. Okay. Good. Yay. So now,
Jeannie, I'm sorry, can we do questions since you ended early? I've got a lot of burning questions.
read my mind, Michelle. I was just about to say, now we have time for questions. So what have we got in terms of questions around these topics? And, you know, people, if you have questions for Billy's presentation, that's fine too. Okay.
I think I'm going to go in reverse order
Okay.
because those are what we just taught. So when you're teaching someone a skill, at what point of them displaying the skill do you give them more complicated things to work on? How do you avoid giving them things in the wrong order to learn or avoid overwhelming them with techniques?
Okay, well, as you learn to listen for function, the person singing will be able to deliver better function, clearer vowel sounds, more accuracy in intonation and pitch accuracy, more control over volume, more pitch range, more physical coordination. Those things are verifiable. You can see them and you can hear them. And so if you have someone who can sing a nice clear tone on a high note at a mezzo forte for 10 seconds and then go on to sing other things, that's a measure of how more skilled are they now than when they started. So you're measuring pitch range, you're measuring control over volume, which implies control over the rib cage and the belly muscles, coordinated, and also on tonal clarity. It's fine to know how to sing a breathy sound if you want to, or to make a little noise if you want to sound grungy. But the tone that you want the person to live in as a default, which I'm not doing at the moment, is clear. Not breathy, not noisy, clear. So as you have these criteria, then you as the teacher can say, okay, so they can do that. So then you push a little bit on the boundaries out, a little lower, a little higher, a little louder, a different quality in the vowel, a little smilier, happier. We call that bright, a little darker, and then a little more deliberately on the chest side, a little more deliberately on the head side, a ratio in the mix. Those are skill building things that come in sequence, and you'll get that more as we go on. What else?
Okay, how do we deal with the new musical theater rep, mostly for men, with ranges outside of the range of most teens?
Yeah, I know. I have to say that it's very difficult. The cheap, easy, fast way, without having to wait until the technical work is as solid as possible, is to work with speech. And depending on the venue, like if it's a school production or a community production, you can often have a speaky sound where you try to get the person to talk higher and higher as they go up, which is better than having it go like this. Oh, I can't get there. Yeah, they buzzed. Did you hear? The stopgap measure after that is to try to get the falsetto if they can get there. So as they go up, then they go up more like that, and go like that, and you can go breathy and go up. And neither of those is ideal, but they are, the falsetto one is the less taxing one, but could be difficult to negotiate in a boy whose voice is in the middle of changing. The speaking voice quality, if they're not pushing on it, can stay slightly more chesty, and sometimes that'll suffice. And you might have to compromise and live with something that ideally you wouldn't really like, but it's not going to hurt the kid, and it'll get you by. And those kinds of compromises we have to deal with all the time. You always compromise to what is the healthiest sound you can get the kid to do over a performance schedule without sounding any worse than necessary. Okay. Yes, what else, Michelle?
What is your approach with beginning students that have not had voice lessons and do not have a style preference?
You train the voice generically for 2 years, which means that even if the kid does have a style preference, you kind of ignore it. I mean, you patronizingly go, yes, yes, okay, we know you want to sing grunge music tomorrow. Good for you. And you don't point that out, but you do it because that's the right thing to do. So you develop head register, particularly in the young voice. Head register is very valuable, but you don't have to only spend all your time on woo, hee, woo. You know, you can actually go away from that and do ah. You try to keep the voice relaxed, but in a comfortable way. The idea that everybody has to always be relaxed is incorrect. Everybody has to be comfortable and adjustable. So there's a difference between ah and ah, because the second one is actually a shape of making on purpose. And it's relaxed, but it's functionally available. I would think of it more as being poised, vocally poised. Then after you get that going, you have to look at the body. You have to the rib cage behavior, the belly behavior, to coordinate the intercostal muscles with the abdominal muscles. We'll talk about that. And then control over the exhalation, to learn that on your own first, to just do hissing and pulsed hissing and those are all things that a young person can learn, which does not tax the vocal cords. And then what you want on the low voice is a speech-oriented chest register. So you don't want to take a young voice or an inexperienced adult and go, ah, you'll kill them. But you do want to think, hello, how are you? And not, hello, how are you? Because that's something you have to go away from. And as you do that, it's all those different spokes on the wheel over time. For 2 years, everything will expand. And that's what functional training is. And that's not new to me. I mean, everybody who's been trained well has had some version of that. You want to stay away from squeeze this, push this, pull that, lift this, flip that, full flute, vocal cords. Don't do that. Okay, what else?
This is just for Billy. It's just a comment and I wanted him to hear it. Thanks for bringing the current discussions into the course. Amazed.
Oh, thank you.
Referring to your talk about your bringing in racism and awareness. Okay, back to Jeannie.
We're all trying to learn from our Black friends how to be better at being inclusive and supportive. Even those of us who never really had any, we were always colorblind, we still need to learn. I think we don't even know some things that we don't know. So somatic voice work, we're learning. What else, Michelle?
Okay, I have had women come to me and ask to work on their falsetto. I used to tell them this wasn't really a thing, just a misunderstanding, but I have seen some writing on female falsetto now, being the breathy upper register. What is your take on this?
Well, we have a quote in the text, which we haven't gotten to yet, which is from Dr. Ingo Tietze. Most of you know him, but for those that don't, Dr. Tietze is the person who is the director of the Vocology Institute, which takes place in Salt Lake City, Utah, under the auspices of the University of Iowa, where he's a professor. And he is the eminent voice science expert in the United States. I had so many people argue with me about this that I went to him and I said, would you please write the answer to this? And it's in your text. Functionally speaking, there is no difference in vocal fold behavior between men and women. There's a quality that's called falsetto, which is head register or loft or one of the other terms that we have. And then there's the other one, which is we associate with speech and chest and lower voice. So if you don't want to take my word for it, and you don't have to take my word for anything I say ever, take his. He's kind of like the buck stops with him. And he's going to tell you, you can read it, it's the same. The only reason we use the term falsetto in pedagogy is because that's what was coined a long time ago, because in an adult man it sounds a little falsetto. But it's functionally, and there's nothing false about it, and head register does not have to be breathy. It isn't always breathy, although that is common. To tell you the truth, even when I was a kid, I never had a breathy head register. It was always clear. In fact, that got me into trouble sometimes, because the school choir director would say, "We can hear you. Jeanette, we can hear you." And I'm like, because my voice was clear. Okay, so don't go the idea that it has to be breathy. It doesn't have to be. It usually is, but that's part of what you're going to correct. What else, Michelle?
How much do you discuss the particular goal of an exercise with young students? What is the best way to share with them your assessment of their issue or difficulty in a compassionate way so that you would then address the goal of solving part of that issue with an exercise?
We have a section called age-based parameters, which I believe is one of our videos, right, Michelle?
Yes.
So that question is going to get answered in that lecture, which we have for you on the Google
Classroom.
So rather than answer that redundantly, when you see that, if you still have a question, then you can let us know. But I think that will answer a lot of those questions.
And Jeannie, I think you just did mention this about breathiness. How would you work with pre-adolescent girls who have noise in their head voice, difficulty singing with clear tone in the B5 to E5 range?
The same way you work on it with everybody, which is you do SOVTE exercises, semi-occluded vocal tract exercises, otherwise known as humming or open mouth humming, NG sounds. And also, as you work with the child over time, they get a little bit more strength and control over the rib cage, belly ratio. That can help, because if the rib cage is just going, then that also makes it sound breathy. But getting a clearer tone first is more of a helpful way to go from the throat into the body rather than from the body into the throat. But you can flirt with that. And you have to give it time. Okay, chest register, when it starts to function, also helps the sound get clear. And sometimes that's enough to take the breathiness out.
Okay, how are we doing on time? Good, we're good.
3 minutes, I think, and then you.
How would you work? No, I just read that. At what point do you introduce vibrato? How do you encourage it?
You don't introduce vibrato. Vibrato shows up on its own after about 2 years of functional training. If you get enough energy in the system, it should show up. It's a normal function. 1 out of 5 people has vibrato naturally, and the vibrato pulse is generally between 5.5 and 6.5 pulses per second at approximately a quarter tone above and a quarter tone below the sounded frequency. In emotional moments, sometimes it goes as much as a half step above and a half step below. The pulses should not really be slower than 5.5, because otherwise it becomes almost 2 pitches, 2 audible pitches. In somebody that has had that amount of training and it's still not there, there are several exercises that can act as a spark that can trigger the movement. And the student has to be willing to fool around with it. So you do them as a way to encourage the vibrato. And often when it shows up, it's very tiny, and the student will miss it. So you say, "Hey, there was a vibrato there." There was? I didn't hear that. Oh yeah, it was there. Sometimes just at the end for half a moment. So the exercises that stimulate vibrato are not, I don't go into those in great detail in this course, because we look at that more in level 2. But things you can get at the vibrato through the base of the tongue and through movements of the base of the tongue, and then also through giggling, because giggling is the closest deliberate thing that you can do that is close to, but not the same as, a vibrato. So we'll cover that more in level 2. One more, Michelle.
Okay, one more. This is a quickie. Jeannie, do you work repertoire with the beginner student?
Sometimes, depends. I know that the motivation for most young people is they want to learn a song. So I would probably try to do a song, but a song that is simple, something that is not overtaxing. And we do have quite a bit more choice now. There are many books published for kids and teens that have repertoire that you can use. You can choose Elizabethan songs that are not too rangy. You have to find a comfortable pitch range, and you can use folk songs. But you know, mostly they come in, they want to sing on lesson 3, Defying Gravity, and you can't do that, you know, or they want to sing And I'm Telling You when they're 10. 99% of the time, it's like, good, I'm glad you want to sing that, but let's sing this first. Okay? And so you really have to be cagey about, you know, it's like, hey, Mom, can I have lots of chocolate for breakfast? Well, maybe on a special occasion, but right now, let's have some eggs. Okay, so you have to be careful about that. Now, Michelle is going to talk to you about exercises in listening.
Yes. This was a exercise that you were supposed to do already, actually, but it's fine if you haven't done it. Most people have done it. If you haven't done it, do it in this break that's coming up right now. It's on the Google Classroom, and you don't have to turn anything in, but keep your page, because on day 3, we may listen to this list again and see if there's anything different or more that you hear then. I also want to say that we are monitoring who's coming in, and if you're chronically late, as Jeannie said, then there might be an issue with you getting the certificate. So if you have to take a potty break or something, don't log out, because then it looks like you're logging in, you know, at 12:30. So that's all I have to say for now.
Okay, now
Please, enjoy one of our movement breaks in this break.
in this,
And there's a whole pile of lists of them, so pick any one you want, and if you find some that you like, you could do them over and over again.
right, I want everyone to look at those movement breaks as requirements. I mean, because we're not with you, you're kind of on the honor system, but I really want you to do movement. This is a somatic-based course, and we have really wonderful people who have given you the opportunity to do something good with your body. After the break at 1:15, we will begin with Amanda Chmela, who's going to talk to you about functional principles, and we're going to talk about the registers and belting. And so please be on screen and ready to go for Amanda. And then after Amanda, you'll see me again. Today is a kind of a hard day because we do all the presentation today, so we talk a lot. Tomorrow and the next day, you get to sing, you get to work, and get to hear each other. It's more dynamic, so be patient with the blah blah today, a lot of blah blah. But hopefully interesting blah blah. And don't forget to have a good snack to keep your energy up. And we will see you at 1:15.